Your Excellencies, welcome to this panel discussion. President Kagame, I'm going to start off by putting the first question to you. We heard His Excellency Haile Mariam Desalegn outlining to us the impact of the crises and what we need to do to respond to these. The question to you, Your Excellency, is how do these crises that have exposed major fault lines in our food systems and food security, how do they change the continental agenda, starting here in Rwanda, and what does this mean for how we refocus going forward?
Well, first of all, the crisis is a serious one, and in order to deal with the issues surrounding it, we need to develop a sense of urgency and put everything in perspective and even ask ourselves, how did we get to this point? And therefore, that helps us to look back and maybe see where we fell short and try to correct what we can and as fast as we can so that we don't have to repeat the mistakes or the shortcomings. And really I'm saying this with the sense that most of the things are known. Where it is building capacities, domestic, national capacities to meet the challenges of the food systems and make sure our people don't go hungry and so on and so forth. Second, that it's not just what we say that is very important, food. Food is important in many ways. I mean, nothing else can be done by anybody unless we have fed. It's about life. It's about, therefore, the fuel for human beings to live and be able to do what they want to do.
Yeah.
But associated with that, the most important, interesting thing is it is also a business. Mm-hmm. It benefits from skills, knowledge, technology. And so if this is the case, why don't we therefore do what we know we need to do to bring all these things together, especially knowing so that in Africa, we stop being challenged or running into all kinds of shocks just because a crisis has hit somewhere else. You can see, I think it was mentioned, if you look at the crisis in Ukraine, Russia-Ukraine crisis, okay, then the whole of Africa suffers because we can no longer get wheat or fertilizer or different kinds of things. So all these are lessons we should learn from, and they have been there. The lessons have been there for a long time, for many years before. So if we can learn these lessons and therefore quickly act to prevent such a things happening, I think in Africa there are many toolkits we have in our hands we can apply to really protect ourselves from these shocks that come up every other time from different other continents when we can deal with the situation ourselves. So I could go on and on, but let me maybe stop here for now.
President Kagame, I think your response echoes so much of the sentiments we've been hearing in many of the panel discussions of the last few days. As you speak about food and its centrality to human life, we're reminded of the conversation this morning that this should be seen as a national security issue because food is that important. As you talk about the fact that we know what to do and we have the toolkits, one of the resounding sentiments earlier was, well, what these crises have done is they've exposed the issue. But the issue has been there, and we know the challenges. So now it's time for us to get done. And of course, you call on us to do so with urgency. So let me build on that, and let me come to President Mnangagwa next with a question to you, sir. I want to stay within the context of these crises. And the question to you is, what impact have these crises had on Zimbabwe? And what has this meant in terms of your agricultural policies, your plans, and your ambitions for the country in response to these crises that we're facing right now?
Well, thank you very much for the question, moderator. But since it's my first time to speak here, I would like to acknowledge the presence of His Excellency President Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda, and His Excellency Head of State and Government, President of Niger, and my brother, the Vice President from Tanzania, and esteemed ladies and gentlemen. Well, for the purpose of background and context, allow me to highlight to our esteemed audience here the Zimbabwe situation, because my country has been under sanctions for the last 20 years. So I'm going to reply to this question with that background as a context of our situation. Over the last 2 decades, about 22 years now, Zimbabwe has been under Western sanctions. And ultimately, this has affected our capacity to import certain essential requirements. With regard to specific issues of food security, Zimbabwe, since independence, we have been importing our wheat for our bread from Ukraine, and our fertilizer from the Russian Federation.
Yes.
But now, fortunately, under the Second Republic, we introduced a model to say we need to have food security on the basis of our own domestic resources. So with regard to the importation of wheat from Ukraine, I'm happy to say in the past, Zimbabwe used to grow only about 3 months of supply of wheat for the country. And under the model we've introduced this last season, we have now been able to produce 13 months of wheat supply for Zimbabwe, which means we now have an excess of 1 month of wheat. And so the crisis relating to importation of wheat from Ukraine does not affect us. We are now on. With regard to the issue of grain which we eat, that is maize, corn, we also have a model where now we realize, because of the issue of climate change in the country, we have introduced a program the last 2.5 years to 3 years now. In every single province in Zimbabwe, we are building dams. And we are also introducing irrigation. We need 360,000 hectares of land under irrigation. And we know that by next season, we will have completed that exercise, and we shall be sufficient with regard to grain again. Whether there is drought or there is no drought, we are achieving that goal. So, yes, we have challenges with regard to the issue of gas and fuel in Zimbabwe that we import. To some extent, the issues in Europe have affected us. But I think as an African country and as a continent, so many countries in Africa have gone under serious challenges. I'm aware of the challenges Zimbabwe has faced, but when we were facing these challenges, Europe went to sleep. They never bothered about the fact that an African country was facing challenges. And in my view, I don't know whether my colleagues will agree with me, but in my view, Zimbabwe will not fail to sleep because other countries in Europe have problems. But of course, the biggest challenge is the question of the pandemic.
Yes.
And you may be aware that when the pandemic visited the entire globe, many countries received support from the World Bank, IMF, the first world supported many countries. Zimbabwe did not receive anything because we're an isolated country. We did the support from our own African brothers, not from outside Africa. So as a result of that, we began to think outside the box.
Yeah.
We've provided our own PEs sufficient to deal with our own situation. And we also had got to be squeezed on the question of accessing medical oxygen. And we put a group of scientists in our own country, and within 15 months, we are now in production of our own medical oxygen, and we have surplus for those who may want it. For now, I think I may end there.
Thank you very much, President Mnangagwa. And I do want to just highlight a few things that are just very important. One of the lines that you've delivered, you said, this crisis does not affect us. And I think it really gets to the core of the nub of this conversation. How do we begin to reduce the vulnerabilities? How do we begin to ensure that we are not vulnerable to external shocks? And of course, what we're hearing in your narration is that in the midst of the crisis, Zimbabwe built its resilience. And ladies and gentlemen, as you've heard, excess wheat, if anybody is willing and wanting to get wheat from Zimbabwe and others. Thank you very much for that, President Mnangagwa. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if I do want to bring to your attention that if you are on translation, it's English on Channel 1 and French on Channel 2. In particular, as I go to Son Excellence President Bazoum. Now, the question is the same, Your Excellency. What is the impact of the crisis on Niger? What does it mean for your agricultural policies? What does it mean for your plans? And what does it mean for the ambitions of the country? Over to you.
Très bien. Merci, Madame. Je voudrais à mon tour saluer mes homologues, le président Kagame, le président Mnangagwa, le vice-président de Tanzanie, saluer la présence du président Obasanjo et du Premier ministre Ale Mariam Desalegn, saluer l'ensemble des participants à cette rencontre, le Premier ministre Zinsou, que j'ai aperçu en entrant. Vous savez, Madame, quand il y a eu la crise du Covid et que nous en avions perçu l'allure, à partir de ce qui s'est passé déjà en Chine puis en Europe, nous avons été très fébriles, nous avons pris des mesures draconiennes pour en prévenir les dégâts. Toutes les mesures qui ont été prises en Europe, nous les avons presque reproduites à l'identique. Et puis, par la suite, nous nous sommes rendus compte que la maladie n'a pas la même allure qu'elle a ailleurs, chez nous, dans les pays du Sahel. Et nous nous sommes dit que cela s'expliquerait certainement par divers facteurs qui ont à voir notamment avec le climat, mais aussi, surtout, avons-nous pensé que cela résultait de notre faible connexion à la communauté internationale. Tout à l'heure, je me suis rendu compte qu'au total, nos chiffres statistiques indiquent qu'il y a eu 203 morts au Niger et que toutes ces mesures que nous avons prises n'avaient pas de sens. Et nous avons dit que nous, pour une fois, le fait de ne pas être trop connecté au monde international a du bien. Et ce qui s'est passé en Russie et en Ukraine avait pris une allure qui pouvait nous intimider aussi et nous rappeler un peu ce qui s'est passé avec la Covid. Mais nous nous sommes dit là également que non, puisque nous ne sommes pas bien connectés, il n'y aura pas les effets qu'on a observés ailleurs, sauf que nous avons eu tout faux, madame. La Covid, elle nous a impactés d'une autre façon que par le degré de morbidité ou de la prévalence de la maladie ou de la mortalité. Nous en avons ressenti les effets en retard lorsque nous avons assisté à cette grande inflation du fret maritime et un renchérissement des coûts des transports. Cela a induit une grande inflation sur les aliments que nous importons de très loin et tout ce que nous importons d'ailleurs et qui est très important. En effet, la crise de l'Ukraine, elle a eu pour effet justement de renforcer encore davantage l'inflation sur les fret, sur le transport, et cela s'est traduit par une inflation sur les vivres que nous importons d'Asie, d'Europe et d'ailleurs, et toutes les matières alimentaires que nous importons. Cela s'est traduit surtout sur l'inflation dans le domaine de l'énergie. Nous avons été obligés d'augmenter de 30% le prix du gasoil pour maintenir la subvention que nous devons assurer sur le gaz et sur le prix de l'électricité. C'était à la condition que nous augmentions 30% du prix du litre de gasoil pour que nous maintenions les subventions et que nous assurions d'ailleurs même une permanence du gasoil de façon à permettre le transport et le commerce. Vous voyez, ce n'était pas prévisible cela, mais pourtant ça nous est arrivé. Il y a eu aussi un autre effet pervers, plus fâcheux peut-être même, parce qu'il y a eu un renchérissement du dollar par rapport au franc CFA. Et notre monnaie s'est dévaluée de façon sensible, tant et si bien que aujourd'hui nous avons beaucoup moins de capacité à nous endetter au niveau du marché financier régional du fait de la hausse des taux d'intérêt qui a été une des mesures prises par la Banque centrale des États de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, justement pour faire face à cette situation sur le marché international. Tout cela s'est traduit également par une rareté des intrants dans le domaine de l'agriculture. Nous venons d'avoir une saison pluvieuse qui est plutôt bonne, mais nous sommes sûrs que nos récoltes se ressentiront du fait que les intrants non organiques n'ont pas été disponibles aussi souvent que nous l'aurons souhaité ou ont coûté très cher. Et nous avons utilisé donc moins d'engrais cette année pour assurer la campagne agricole au cours de la saison pluvieuse actuelle et les rendements s'en ressentiront demain. Voilà de tas d'effets que nous avons ressentis au Niger, qui est pourtant un pays, avons-nous pensé, très peu connecté sur le marché international. Voilà quelques-uns des effets. Si vous permettez, je peux dire un peu les mesures que nous avons prises justement dans le domaine agricole pour faire face aux impacts de cette situation et les mesures que cela commande désormais pour nous, pour que quand même, parce que en Afrique, je ne pense pas qu'il y a un domaine où nous avons autant de potentiel que nous avons que dans celui de l'agriculture. Mais pourtant, c'est celui où nous dépendons paradoxalement le plus de ce qui peut se passer ailleurs et très loin de notre continent. Nous avons les terres arables les meilleures, en grande quantité, plus grande quantité que partout ailleurs. Nous avons des sources d'énergie, nous avons un potentiel hydrique très important, mais faute d'avoir mis en valeur l'ensemble de ces atouts, nous nous retrouvons dans cette situation de dépendance où les effets des mesures de ce genre-là ont les impacts aussi catastrophiques que ce que je viens de décrire pour le Niger. Et considérant cela, le Niger a décidé de mettre en œuvre une stratégie de sécurité alimentaire et de développement durable de son agriculture en vue justement de promouvoir l'ensemble de ces atouts auxquels je viens de faire allusion pour que désormais nous soyons autonomes et que nous ne ressentirons plus les effets des situations qui ont cours ailleurs et qui n'auraient pas dû nous regarder du tout. Voilà, madame.
Thank you very much, President Bazoum. And so what I'm hearing loud and clearly is, how do we take our assets and how do we translate them so that they work for us? And how do we ensure that our assets give us autonomy, give us self-sufficiency, and of course give us the security that we're looking for? Thank you very much for sharing the experience of Niger. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm coming to Vice President Mpango next. And Vice President, my question is similar in the sense that we're keen to understand the impact of the crises on Tanzania, but maybe also if you can touch on the Tanzania Agriculture Sector Development Program, because we know that that is one of the flagship programs that is really designed to speak to some of the issues that we've raised here today. Your comments on the impact and how this particular policy intervention is designed as a response.
Well, first, thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I'm really humbled and privileged to be sitting on a panel with my presidents. Thank you, President Paul Kagame, and the people of Rwanda for your hospitality. We really feel at home. I'm also delighted. I'm happy to be sharing the same panel with my elder brother and statesman, Emerson Mnangagwa from Zimbabwe, and my brother also from Niger. Well, first, I bring very warm greetings from Her Excellency, President Samia Suluhu Hassan, whom I'm happy to be representing on this panel and in this meeting overall. Well, Tanzania, fortunately, by and large, is self-sufficient in food and has been a food basket for the region. But that said, it is also clear, like most other African countries, that productivity in agriculture has remained low for the obvious reasons that we know. Low technology, very little use of fertilizers. The sector itself seems to be unattractive to our youth. We still depend by and large on vagaries of weather. So rain, not much by way of irrigation, limited access to finance, markets, technology. We still have huge post-harvest losses to the tune of almost 30%. And of course, all these weigh very heavily on our food systems.
Yeah.
So, as if that was not enough, then we had multiple crises, which we all know. The COVID-19, and we are still harboring sore wounds out of it. And then came the conflicts, Ukraine versus Russia, but geopolitical conflicts growing again and raising tensions globally. Food and energy insecurity as a result of these tensions. In addition to climate change and extreme events, but also barriers to technology. So given these, really, in the case of Tanzania, what we saw was disruptive impacts, not just of COVID, but all these forces.
Yeah.
So overall, for example, our GDP collapsed from an annual growth of 7% down to 4.8% currently. Supply chains, particularly of edible oils, wheat, were disrupted. Procurement of fertilizers, farm implements, also machineries, farm machineries, all these following lockdowns, particularly in the countries from which we import these goods. Of course, the cost of living went up with food inflation increasing, and of course, the cost of fossil fuels, the petrol and diesel. And naturally, the cost of production also increased. But there is a good story out of it, because we also saw a rebound of prices of rice and maize, which translated into basically a windfall to our farmers of maize and rice. And we were able to sell also to our neighbors. So these were sort of the overall impacts that we have seen. And now coming to your question that I should touch on our agricultural sector development program. Number one, we had to redefine our priorities.
Yeah.
And particularly, one was when we saw an opportunity to increase production of oil seeds, sunflower, palm, cotton, wheat. We have actually decided to prioritize those. But also, we are seeing our people going for substitutes. So instead of bread, our people are going for yams, they are going for potatoes, they are going for cassava and plantain. But also, it was a motivation for us as a government to scale up and attract investment in the production of farm inputs, particularly fertilizers. So we have a fertilizer factory under construction, and soon we'll have actually two to cover up for the deficit in fertilizers. But also, we decided that it is time to increase our budgetary allocations to agriculture. So from an average of around $125 million per annum in the previous budget, we have increased it to $404 million, and actually targeting research and extension, irrigation, seed multiplication, as well as employing staff, extension staff, beefing up their toolkits, and training our extension staff. But also interestingly, we decided that it is now time, given the population structure of Tanzania, where more than 65% of the population are young people, we decided that it's time that we need a special program that will target youth and women. So we have a special program whereby we intend to assist entrepreneurial skills of our youth and women, make them easier to access land, also finance, markets, and technology. And in that regard, the Central Bank of Tanzania actually put up a very special facility where they extend monies. There is a very special fund where commercial banks borrow from the central bank, and then the central banks on lend to our farmers at interest of single-digit rate. currently around 9% interest rate. But also we have gone for fiscal and regulatory reforms. We have scrapped more than 140 nuisance taxes, including those that affect our farmers. We have also decided to provide subsidy, particularly for sunflower seeds, cashew nut seeds, also cotton. We have gone for rehabilitation and building of new storage facilities, particularly for our grains. And of course, finally, we are making a very special drive to attract our partners, both locally and internationally, to partner with us in undertaking all these measures. And we think this will provide a stepping stone towards improving our food systems.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. And I think it deserves a round of applause indeed. As I was taking down the notes of the different interventions, it almost sounds like a 10-point plan in terms of how do we go about making sure that we're using policy instruments to drive the progress that we're looking for. You've spoken about rethinking priorities, consumer education, and that's where the substitutes really do come from. You've spoken about scaling and investing, looking at the budget, making sure you're bringing in a gender lens, as well as a youthful lens. Financing by leveraging the relationship of the central banks and the commercial banks, but also not shying away from fiscal and regulatory reform that then creates the enabling environment. Now, Your Excellencies, as I come to a second and final round of questions, President Kagame, I want to bring the climate agenda into focus in the conversation now. We know that that is the most important thing as we think about the context of transforming food systems. We've got Africa's COP on the horizon. The question to you, Your Excellency, is what do you see as the priorities from an African perspective as we prepare for COP27?
Right, for COP27 that will take place in Egypt, we are provided with an opportunity yet again for Africa to spell out our priorities and put them front and center and very clear. At the same time, as we go about all this and knowing the challenges we have to face and deal with, we also bear in mind that in the relationships and things that have to be done together, collaboratively with other parts of the world, that actually Africa contributes the least to what drives this crisis.
Sure.
But nonetheless, that should not, again, it only informs our reasoning and our actions, but it doesn't stop us doing what we have to do.
Yeah.
That is quite difficult. And we have the knowledge that, one, first of all, it is an uncertain and predictable situation we have to deal with. If you look at what is happening in each of our countries or regions and beyond. Rain is being affected and different problems around that, and therefore directly linked with how it affects food systems and food security. So we have to make investments ourselves to begin with, even with our limited resources. For example, we have to invest smartly in data systems so that we at least are informed as far as certain elements are concerned that contribute to the crisis, and then know how to deal or to treat different regions of our countries or again, our continent. We also have to remind the rest of the world, given what I said earlier, that it is important the commitments we always make together should be fulfilled.
Yeah.
In particular, I'm talking about if you look at the financing that is required for climate adaptation. These are huge funds required to do that, and some commitments have already been made. It's important that they are fulfilled, and so that we avoid what is likely to happen once these commitments are not fulfilled. It undermines the political will for us to continue with ambitious programs that we know we have to undertake also to deal with such matters. So it's not a blame game, but
Yeah.
it's something we know that we have each to contribute, but those who contribute more to the crisis should contribute even more to the solution, or trying to withstand the shocks that come from it. So really that is, for me, when we look at COP27, it's about that. It's priorities, it's about commitments, it's about fulfilling them, it's about understanding how to approach everything, knowing that it is creating another crisis, and that is it's affecting food systems. It doesn't matter whether some of the aspects of the crisis are man-made or natural or something. There's something in between that we can do as people. And Africa always, as far as we are concerned, should come at the center, and what we can do together ourselves, or how we can do together with others, and so on and so forth.
President Kagame, thank you very much. It's an incredible linkage to your very early comment when we started the panel, where you said we need to be courageous to go back to the question of how did we get here? And that is going to be very important as I'm listening in to how we frame and articulate the African position at COP27. Allow me then to make my way back to President Mnangagwa once again. Mr. President, what is becoming apparent in light of the Sustainable Development Goals is that many African countries are not going to meet the targets by 2030. The question to you, sir, is, looking ahead, where do you see opportunities for greater collaboration amongst African leaders to ensure that we get back on track as much as possible?
Well, thank you again for that question. As my brother has said, COP26 ended up with the third world countries, Africa and some countries in Asia, and so Latin America, on one side, and the first world on the other. And I may have misunderstood, but I felt that the first world was looking at us jumping, leapfrogging to embrace green energy, clean energy. And yet, they themselves, when they developed, there's a history of how they developed to where they are. And in that process, they used the thermal power. And now we are at a stage where most of our African countries have coal and we use thermal power, and they were told this is dangerous. We, as my brother said, they made commitments. If indeed they honor the commitments, well and good, we'll then use their finance to generate green energy. But in the absence of that, I, for one, would not abandon using thermal power in order to modernize and industrialize Zimbabwe. I'm fully aware that as a result of the problems in Europe, some of the countries who are speaking at COP16 are going back to thermal power currently. So this is the example of double standards. It is critically important that we both understand it is necessary that, of course, we move on. But we must be allowed, be given transition, a reasonable transition to move away from thermal power to green energy. So it is my view that Africa, and in fact, I think that what is happening currently makes us in Africa to wake up. We have all the resources needed to develop our countries, from food security, fertilizer security. We have all the inputs. I'm happy that Tanzania has just said that they are building their fertilizer factory. And may I also announce that on Monday, 2 days ago, I commissioned the mine in Zimbabwe for the production of fertilizer. So Africa has the resources to be self-sufficient, to modernize our countries, to industrialize our countries, to mechanize our countries. All what is needed is cooperation, integration, and the sharing of experiences and our resources. If we did that, we will succeed. But I believe that when we go to COP27 in Egypt, end of this year, I have not done that the African voice will be one, that we must be allowed to be given sufficient transition period so that we move. But if they want us to leapfrog to their level, they must pay the cost.
Thank you very much, President Mnangagwa. And of course, you highlight the big conversation of what is the just transition and what should it look like, but also you're taking us back to the point raised again by His Excellency Desalegn, where he said collective will, collective voice, and that's what actually leads to collective action. So I want to stay within the agenda and the common African position ahead of COP27 as I come to you, President Bazoum, once again. As I come to you, sir, in your opinion, what else do you think is important in the context of a common position amongst African states as we go into COP27? What should we be putting on the table collectively, in your view?
S'il y a une question sur laquelle les intérêts des différents pays sont divergents, c'est bien la question du changement climatique. Parce que, tout simplement, nous n'avons pas les mêmes responsabilités dans ce qui est devenu de notre planète. Il y en a qui en ont profité pour la dégrader. Ils ont promu des modes de développement qui ont usé d'énergie, qui ont eu un grand impact sur l'état de la planète. Il y en a, et c'est nous autres Africains, qui ont subi cette situation. Et les mesures qui sont préconisées ont tendance à percevoir les choses comme si nous étions dans la même situation, au point où on préconise des choses qui sont totalement absurdes vu du continent africain et vu de la perspective qui est celle des pays africains. Et il n'est pas possible pour les pays africains d'aller vers des énergies vertes directement sans transition, parce que dire cela, c'est partir du postulat que nous sommes les mêmes et nous avons atteint un même niveau de développement. S'il y en a qui peuvent supporter une telle évolution, d'autres, en revanche, ne le pourront pas parce que nous ne pouvons pas laisser nos richesses dans notre sous-sol et envisager des choses que nous ne pouvons pas atteindre. Le Niger est un pays qui dispose de ressources d'énergie fossile, du charbon, du pétrole, et il n'y a aucune raison qui peut commander que nous puissions y renoncer. Nous avons vu des pays européens renoncer à l'énergie nucléaire, pour laquelle pourtant ils avaient fait des investissements importants, même s'ils sont en train de faire machine arrière ces derniers temps du fait des problèmes posés par les difficultés qu'ils ont avec la Russie. Mais des pays comme le nôtre ont besoin d'utiliser le potentiel de leurs richesses que constituent les énergies fossiles pour faire en sorte qu'ils atteignent un niveau de développement et de prospérité à même par la suite de leur permettre d'envisager des choses dont ils ne peuvent pas faire l'économie. L'Europe et nos partenaires pays industrialisés, les Occidentaux de façon générale, ces idées qu'ils pensent qu'elles sont indispensables pour la Terre doivent être manipulées de façon à prendre en compte la diversité de la Terre, justement, et la diversité des intérêts des différents acteurs. Donc nous, en Afrique, nous devons déjà nous rendre compte qu'il y a eu beaucoup de difficultés à mettre en œuvre les mécanismes de financement de l'adaptation. Regardez la différence entre les engagements qui ont été pris à la COP 15 de Paris et ce qui est en train de se réaliser aujourd'hui encore. À la COP 26, nous avons fait état de notre déception, nous avons fait part de notre déception et de tous les manquements que nous avons observés dans la mise en œuvre des engagements justement de la COP de Paris à Sharm el-Sheikh. Nous allons remettre encore le même débat, mais nous savons que nous sommes dans une situation de rapport de force qui ne nous est pas favorable et c'est pourquoi ce sont des matières sur lesquelles il faut concevoir qu'il y ait de postures dissidentes et l'Afrique doit être sur une posture dissidente sur ces questions aussi longtemps qu'on n'a pas mis en œuvre tous les mécanismes de financement justement de l'adaptation. En ce qui nous concerne, nous devons aujourd'hui, tenant compte du fait que quand vous prenez un pays comme le Niger, du fait des changements climatiques, les rendements agricoles sont divisés de moitié, les terres elles-mêmes susceptibles de produire se sont totalement aménuisées, la biodiversité s'est littéralement aménuisée au point où tout ce que vous entendez à propos des conflits qu'il y a dans le Sahel et qu'on considère comme un conflit ayant à voir uniquement avec la religion n'est que la traduction des problèmes qui sont posés justement par les changements climatiques. Aujourd'hui, ce qui est en cause au Sahel, c'est le pastoralisme, tout simplement, et tous les acteurs ceux qui portent cette violence sur laquelle les reportages des journalistes font état uniquement de l'islam, sont le reflet en vérité de conflits qui ont à voir avec le changement climatique, avec la lutte pour les ressources naturelles tout simplement. Et ces problèmes-là sont des problèmes que nous devons, nous, Africains, nous, pays concernés par ces situations, régler à travers des politiques qui font la promotion de l'utilisation de l'eau à travers l'irrigation, l'exploitation de notre potentiel à produire nous-mêmes nos intrants, à produire nous-mêmes l'engrais, promouvoir des politiques qui reposent sur des problèmes tels que nous les percevons, C'est à cette condition seulement que nous pouvons mitiger les effets du changement climatique. À notre niveau, dans le cadre d'une solidarité à définir entre pays africains, pour ce qui concerne le Niger, je vous ai dit tout à l'heure que nous sommes en train de promouvoir une politique de sécurité alimentaire et de développement durable de l'agriculture que nous appelons les Nigériens nourrissent les Nigériens, à partir de laquelle nous savons que nous avons le potentiel de production de ce dont nous avons besoin pour nous suffire sur le plan alimentaire. Et donc, par conséquent, il s'agit pour nous de promouvoir les technologies qui nous permettront d'avoir les semences les plus adaptées à notre contexte climatique, de produire l'électricité dont nous avons besoin, de produire les engrais dont nous avons besoin, de produire des parcs agro-industriels pour que nous transformions nous-mêmes notre agriculture, que nous soyons totalement autosuffisants. Et cela passe par la promotion de l'éducation. Voilà pourquoi aussi nous insistons en particulier sur l'éducation, parce que c'est seulement l'éducation qui nous permettra justement d'avoir les capacités de mettre en œuvre ces politiques que je viens de définir. Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, President Bazoum, and bringing the issues together quite strategically, speaking on the one hand about what is reasonable is the question that you've raised for us. What is reasonable in terms of the expectation from African countries, but also bringing in now the importance of climate change, and that even as we try to work through and address conflict, we need to understand the root cause of where it comes from, and some of that is rooted in climate change. So thank you for bringing to the surface that complexity. Now, the final question to you, Vice President. As we wrap up, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on how do we keep the spotlight on the political agenda, in particular on the issue of food systems transformation, given that when we started this conversation, we said there are multiple crises. There's the recovery from the pandemic, there is the geopolitical tension, and yet we're saying we want to make sure that food systems transformation remains top of the agenda. How do we do that realistically? What are your words of advice?
Well, thank you. First, I thought I should reinforce the point made earlier by His Excellency President Paul Kagame, that as Africans, we have to stand united on issues that affect our continent. And together we can do so much together. And I think on COP17, the messages are very clear. For us as Africans, I think we need to push our friends from the north really to honor their commitments. I think this is key. I think it is also important that transparency on various ways of funding green technologies, whether it's the carbon trade, it must be laid out there on the table. Let me give an example. I'm told that the carbon sinks do not include only forests. Even huge reserves like our own mighty Serengeti Game Park is a very good carbon sink. But the way in which some of these prominent companies trading carbon come to us, they're actually giving us peanuts, not telling us exactly how much resources are being held there. So it's important as Africans, one, to be able to share the experiences, but push also for transparency in terms of the green technologies, how they'll be funded. Let me also, I think, reinforce the fact that really the transition from fossil fuels for Africa cannot happen overnight. Yeah. We cannot just dismiss the fossil fuels that we have just because others in the north are way ahead. I think Africa should be assisted to transit gradually to the green technologies. Now, back to your question. One, I think we should be using our forums to retain the agenda of improving our systems in all of our meetings, at the AU, in regional groupings. I think this is, we cannot take it away. And there are many areas where we need to cooperate. For example, under the EAC or under SADC, under COMESA, we can collaborate on energy, for example. Tanzania has natural gas. Why can't we cooperate with our neighbors to deal with the energy crisis using our gas? But other countries are doing very well on electricity. So again, and this will help us particularly in agro-processing. So the way to keep this agenda on our desk, do we have a way out? We don't, because it's really the daily lives of our people that we are talking about.
Yep.
So it has to be on it has to remain on the agenda. But this requires, I think, bold and visionary leadership, and we should be able to turn things in favor of Africa. But finally, I think I should make the point that much as we are talking about the Ukraine-Russia conflict, that should not hide the conflicts within the African continent.
Yes.
And the importance of making sure that all efforts are directed at pacifying various fragile countries within our region. So whether it is northern Mozambique, it is the Sahel, and everywhere else, we need our farmers to live and work in peace. And that's the only way we can assure sustainable food systems.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. How do we ensure that we don't lose focus on our own conflicts, but also how do we leverage our regional economic communities for better collaboration, and how do we get more deliberate about using our forums to keep the conversation going? Ladies and gentlemen, if I can kindly ask you to please give the presidential panel a resounding round of applause.